Hey everyone, welcome back to the Becoming Anchored podcast. We're very excited to be with you all today. I'm one of your hosts, Lauren Jackson. This is Laura Deneen. We are two therapists in the Brentwood, Tennessee area. We work in a group private practice called Anchored Counseling Company. We work with really any age, any gender, presenting issues, anything from eating disorders, grief, loss, anxiety, depression, a lot of stuff in between. We really love what we do, and we've been really loving this podcast platform to connect with you guys as well, and just to share some of our life and our experiences as therapists with you all. A quick disclaimer before we get into the content of this episode: this is meant for informational purposes only. So if you are finding that as you're listening to this episode, you might benefit from your own therapy, amazing. Reach out to someone local to you who's licensed, or if you're local to us, reach out to us. We'd love to connect with you.
Thanks so much, Lauren. And like Lauren said, this new adventure of having a podcast has just brought both of us so much joy, and it's been super fulfilling for both of us. And so we're just really grateful to have you. If this is the first episode that you're tuning into, really the purpose of this podcast is twofold. So number one, we are here to share our real life experiences with y'all. We certainly go through hard times as humans, and we're also here to share in your joy and your victories. And so we'll be talking about both our real life experiences on this podcast, and then we're also going to be talking about the things that we have learned over the years practicing as mental health therapists. So we love, love, love what we do. We find it such a beautiful gift to sit with clients day in and day out. And Lauren and I both just love being mental health therapists. And so we're just here to really ride the waves of life with y'all. So welcome to the Becoming Anchored podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about more of an in-depth perspective of why we talk about family of origin stuff, concerns, stories, if you will, in therapy. And this is a topic that Lauren and I are both really passionate about. I know Lauren has done quite a bit of supervision around this topic. I know that she certainly does a deep dive into what we call developmental trauma. But we really wanted to explore this topic with you all today because I'm not sure how many resources are out there on this. I know that there's so many wonderful podcasts and books to supplement the work that you might already be doing in therapy, but we really just wanted to provide a time to share our perspective on family of origin.
Maybe it could be helpful for us to start with giving our own definitions of maybe what family of origin is. So when I think of family of origin, it's a little bit self-explanatory, I guess you could say, but just maybe as a clinician, when I think of family of origin, I think of the family you grew up in, right? And so that can be anybody biological to you that you grew up with, maybe biological mom and dad, and any siblings in the household, and anything and everything else in addition to that. So that could be, maybe you were adopted, maybe you just had a mom growing up, maybe your aunt lived with you guys, maybe you had, grandparents were in and out of the house a lot. So family of origin is really just particularly the primary caregivers that were around you growing up. Primary caregivers can be mom and dad, and can be anybody else who really raised you, and then any other people also around you in that setting. So siblings, other extended family. Maybe you guys hosted an exchange student for a few years. That would be in your early years of development. That would be part of kind of that family of origin, space. So that's what I think of, when I think of family of origin. Is there anything else that you would add to that, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, absolutely accurate. And there's so many layers that I think that we could address in this podcast. So I am one of 4 children. So I grew up with a mom and a dad who were married, and I have a twin brother and two younger sisters. And so that's an example of my family of origin. We did not have anyone else living with us, in the home per se, but my grandparents were involved in my life, and we moved around quite a bit. So that definitely impacted my experience and my story. But yeah, when we think about family of origin, when we are a newborn babe coming into this world, we rely so heavily on our primary caregivers, whether that's, our parents, guardians, aunts, uncles, grandparents, whoever it might be, to cultivate safety for us, to provide, food, nurturing, love, belonging, all the things for us. So this is why in therapy it's so important to talk about our family of origin, is because coming into this world, our brains are not necessarily formed, and there's so much growth that happens in our brains throughout our childhood and adolescence. And so our family of origin does impact us just on so many different levels. I think it can be a place where we learn how to talk about ourselves. So oftentimes, what we hear in a home environment directly impacts us, whether it's said to us or we overhear it. So that can really be formative in terms of our self-esteem or innate sense of self-worth. It can also really guide us in terms of how we do relationships with others. So what we see modeled in our home, or what is challenged or encouraged or perhaps avoided. So our relationship kind of style and both our intrapersonal relationships, so that's our own sense of self-worth, how we talk to ourselves, and our relationship with others, that is oftentimes, the foundation is oftentimes laid by our family of origin. So that's why, as therapists, we really want to know all the ins and outs and all the intricacies of what your family of origin story, background, history is. Those two things were kind of coming to mind, just the really explaining the importance of like a discussion around family of origin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's typically one of the first things when I have a new intake or a new client that's coming into my room that I am really incorporating in those first, handful of sessions as we're joining and building a relationship and establishing treatment goals, and really me just understanding what is bringing that person into my room. I'm taking a kind of what we would call in the therapy world maybe like a biopsychosocial kind of history or whatnot, because that gives me just a really good picture and idea of this maybe symptomology that's showing up in the present, and some of those roots that maybe throughout the therapeutic process we'll be digging at and kind of digging up together and whatnot. And so us as therapists, we're really intrigued by where our clients come from, where their stories. And so I know Laura as well, we hold our clients' stories with a lot of reverence, with a lot of honor, with a lot of compassion, with a lot of safety. That's part of what we're establishing in those first few sessions with the client, is that safety piece, because each of our stories, my story, your story, Laura's story is different and unique and has pain and has wounds. We all have pain. And that is typically, when we're thinking about family of origin and that story work piece, what us as therapists maybe are most interested in, not in like a weird, weird way, but just most like curious about, because typically it's those pain points within our family of origin throughout our story up until now that are so impactful in, like Laura was saying, how we learn to show up in the world. It's typically the wounding that happens, and then what pretty immediately comes after the wounding that informs us, and that our brains develop around and create neural pathways around. And so those are the parts of the story and that family of origin piece that we get so curious about with our clients, and based on our client and the unique needs and the unique presentation that they're bringing informs us as therapists in how quickly and or gently or how we explore that story, how we explore that family of origin with the client. So we're interested. So why is family of origin? Why do we talk about in therapy? Why is it so important? Because as therapists, we want to know you, and that helps us to know you, right? We want to be able to create that safety in the room with you, and sharing about ourselves and sharing about who you are helps to create that and facilitate that. And then we're curious about the pain, because that's typically where the dysfunction is birthed in all of us. All of us, we all have it, right? And so that, for me, when I'm thinking about why is family of origin important to me as a therapist in exploring with my clients, because I want to be curious about where your little tiny baby heart was hurt. That's what I want to know. Yeah.
Your little tiny baby heart.
Yeah.
Yes, and I want to know that as well. And I know that Lauren and I have also done our own kind of therapeutic work around our own families of origin and some of the pain that we've experienced there. And so we definitely hold that with so much honor, like Lauren was talking about. And a lot of our clients do have pretty significant wounding from their families of origin. And really, sometimes when we come to therapy, it can be the first safe space to talk about that. So if you are listening to this podcast today and you were talking about the pain from your family of origin, we see you, and it is valid. And a lot of times clients come to us and they've maybe minimized their pain, or they've invalidated it, or it's been dismissed by their primary caregivers. And so our job as therapists is to validate it and to really figure out kind of how to make meaning of it, if you will, and what the client would like to do with this pain moving forward. And when Lauren's talking about pain points, just an example of that. So more specifically, if you grew up in a family that whenever someone got angry, they maybe didn't talk to you for hours or perhaps days on end. What did you learn about anger, right? So that's an example of an inappropriate or maybe even unhealthy expression of the emotion anger. So how that might show up in our office is perhaps somebody is struggling with an eating disorder or self-harm, or a poor boundary system, or difficulty communicating their needs in friendships. Whatever it might be, that kind of pain point that was observed in your home growing up has ripple effects. And as a child, we don't necessarily know what an emotion is, or, a young child, we might not know. We don't have the language or verbiage for kind of conceptualizing that. And then we also don't necessarily know what healthy expression of emotion is. And so this is a lot of the work that Lauren and I are doing really day in and day out with our clients around that exploration piece of what is your pain, and really providing validation of hey, that sounds like an inappropriate response to XYZ emotion. How did that make you feel at the time? What did you need that you didn't have? This is some of that, what we would call reparenting. So essentially, as an adult, being a loving parent to our younger child. But that's a more specific example of okay, this is what my caregiver did, and that made me feel this way. I wonder if that was the healthiest expression of emotion.
Yeah. So Laura's really speaking to why we as therapists get curious with our clients around the pain that they experienced in their family of origin growing up. And I love this example that you gave, Laura, because I think when we think of, or maybe for lack of a better word, stereotype trauma, perhaps, I'll use that big word, trauma, right, is we maybe think of and maybe some of you guys have heard it described as like big T trauma or little T trauma. I don't love using those words. And I think that there can maybe be a place for them just to help us kind of conceptualize what's going on. But I guess that's neither here nor there. Anyways, maybe when we think about trauma, we sometimes the idea or the image we get in our head is this like really horrific thing. And there's truth in that, right? Trauma is horrific, and there can be certainly really horrific things that end up being traumatic, like a child's house burning down, right? That's a very traumatic moment in time event. Another example might be, I don't know, childhood abuse, or maybe you have your parents got divorced when you were young, right? Like those kind of moments that feel really big and harmful. So the reason why I love Laura's example is because it's speaking to a type of trauma that's a little bit less noticeable and just as painful and just as impactful. So this idea that Laura had mentioned earlier of developmental trauma. So these kind of smaller, more consistent under the rug moments in time that add up over years and years that then end up affecting us in the present, that it's a little bit harder to pinpoint, because what we find is that the pattern is, well, every time mom was mad, she gave you the cold shoulder and didn't talk to you. And that kind of seems like not a big deal. But when that happens, every time mom gets mad to a little 7-year-old girl, then 8-year-old, then 9-year-old, that small thing turns into something really big and really painful, and can impact our system, our nervous system, exactly the way that a bigger T, I'm doing air quotes, bigger T trauma does as well. And so I just wanted to emphasize that I have a place in my heart and for my clients and just the work that I do for developmental trauma. Not necessarily because I have like a history of it. And I've like Laura said, we've both done a lot of our own work around our family of origins, and I could get into my family of origin, and it probably would be like a whole nother conversation. They're so great, and I love them, and I have a mom and a dad, and I live super close to them now, and an older sister and a younger brother, and we had our things growing up that were great and that were not great, and all this stuff. And I think just the way that I was trained as a young therapist in supervision, I just really developed a deep passion for this idea of developmental trauma and how that can be just as impactful on our nervous system, on our bodies, on our brains, on our development, on our cognition, on our beliefs about ourselves, as maybe more overt traumas. And so family of origin is so important because it sheds light and it gives us so much information around those maybe more subtle pain points that can be harder to pinpoint, but that are just as impactful in our present. Because some people come into our offices and they're like, I have all this anxiety, or I have a hard time with like intimacy or opening up, and I just don't know why, and I can't figure it out. And there's not this like big thing that happened when they were 15 or whatever. But as we do more digging, and as we get more into the story and the meat and the place they grew up in, we start kind of uncovering nuggets of pain that are really nuggets of truth of their story that have got them to where they are right now. And then we can do something with that. That's what I love. Like, we can do something with that. That gets me like pumped up.
I can tell just like by your body language. I love it so much. And kind of circling back to this example around the cold shoulder, this is one example of many, but like we talked about, we would be asking a client, how they might have felt, what they might have needed that they didn't have at that time. And then also what they learned about the emotion of anger itself. So what is my relationship to my emotions? In this case, maybe anger. And how would you like to experience that emotion maybe in a healthy way moving forward? Or what would you like to do with your anger in a way that feels aligned with your value system? And a lot of this might be really different from their families of origin. And this is where it can get, we can get really creative as therapists, and it can really be empowering for clients because, when we start to figure out that, oh, my parents did this and that did not feel good, and I don't want to replicate that same cycle for my children. And this can be really empowering for clients to really determine what they would like to do differently, perhaps as they're raising their own children, or maybe you don't have children and you're listening to this podcast and you're really just wanting to nurture your adult self and wanting to do some more of the repair work, and that is certainly valid as well. But yeah, that agency around like, hey, how would you like to, show up in the world in a way that might be different from your own story? And
Right.
I know that can feel oftentimes quite overwhelming, and it can feel scary, I think, to talk about our family of origins and talk about maybe what we want to do differently. I know a lot of clients of mine, in the first few sessions that they're talking about their family of origin, they maybe experience shame or guilt. Like, a lot of people don't want to talk poorly about their parents, and they have this fear of speaking ill of their parents, and what does that mean? And so a lot of this work that we're doing is really opening up permission and giving permission and cultivating safety to name the pain and name it in a truthful, honest way that allows us to move forward into health. So that's something on this podcast that Lauren and I are talking about, and really something that we ask ourselves really nearly on a daily basis, I would say. But what is health in this situation? What is health for me? What does health look like? And that can just be a really beautiful question. So I know I was kind of rambling there, but those are my thoughts on what you shared.
Yeah, yeah. And this, family of origin work, story work, you probably have heard me say that a couple times on here. My clinical supervisor, when I was freshly out of grad school, was pretty heavily trained in story work and this model called healing our core issues. And so it was just truly invaluable. And I'll give you guys some resources here in a minute just around that and kind of how you guys can dig into that yourselves. But what we're really speaking to in this when we're freshly born into this world, and then there are our caregivers, and there they are, and this is the beginning of how we will grow up, right? We're really speaking to this idea of first being dependent on someone else, and then learning to have dependency or independence ourselves, all while we're learning about emotions, because emotions really are this like kind of an inherent like thing that makes us humans, like that sets us apart from other animals and mammals and things like that, is our ability to have emotions and then like have cognition about them and have like thoughts and stuff about them, and then we can do something, and then we can act or react or respond or whatever. And so a lot of the times we will find that our clients ourselves have in some ways grown up in a family of origin where we aren't necessarily taught in the most functional way how to have emotions or know what emotions are, or and maybe aren't modeled emotions particularly well. Not all the time, not in everybody's story. We're because we're all human and we're not perfect. Nobody has emotions perfectly, so none of us are ever going to be modeled emotional intelligence or awareness, whatever, in the most perfect way. So we all have work to do with our emotions for sure. But just the fundamental need that we have in our family of origin throughout our story, growing up developmentally, is this need to be able to know what our bodies are telling us. And that happens through our emotional experience, physiologically, and then cognitively. And so that just, speaks to the importance of emotions and how that can translate into our need for our, caregivers and our family of origin to be able to do that well. And if they didn't, they couldn't, they didn't know how, then again, that is what informs us so much in the present of the work that we need to do. So
yeah,
yeah.
Absolutely. And we're just here to say, like Lauren said, there really is no perfect family or no perfect family of origin. I mess up and we talk openly about our imperfections on the podcast. And one thing that I have really tried to be intentional about with having a little daughter at home is really asking myself, what do I want to take from my family of origin? And what did they do really well? And perhaps what do I want to do differently with my daughter? And so approaching it with curiosity, and I know we use this word quite frequently on the show, but is really fundamental because it allows us to ask ourselves the question in a way that's non-judgmental towards ourselves, in a way that is led with curiosity. And we always talk about curiosity over shame. So that can just be something for you all to be thinking about too, is, okay, what do I want to take with me from my family of origin? What do I want to leave behind? Those are things that I'm kind of continually thinking about, especially having my little girl at home, and just being curious about that. So
Sure.
Yeah, family of origin is a big topic, and I'm sure that we'll do other, episodes on various components of healing from family of origin wounding. And, if your wounding is more, significant or severe, not that it's a comparison between clients, but we certainly see you in that. Perhaps you're estranged from your family, or you're in a really tricky spot with your family, and we see that too. And we just acknowledge that this topic can be one that brings our clients and people that we don't even know who might be listening to the show an incredible amount of pain. And like we talk about, there's still hope for healing from that pain. And we're here just to continually speak to that hope. We can't lose sight of that in this work.
Yeah.
So Lauren actually has some homework for you all, and then I will close this out with an affirmation.
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback off of what you said, Laura, not too long ago. I would really challenge you or encourage you guys or invite you guys to maybe spend some time reflecting on what maybe dysfunction in my family of origin do I notice showing up in my present that I want to pay more attention to, maybe bring more awareness to, build some more insight around. How can I start laying some of that down, or setting some of that down, or turning the volume down on some of that, and leaning into or discovering or pressing into what newness in maybe the family that you're in now, or the space that you're in now, what newness in functional cycles do you want to create? Do you want to move forward with? What good from your family of origin do you want to carry on with you? So just doing some of that reflection that Laura had mentioned earlier. And then I know I was talking a little bit about this kind of model of therapy, story work, healing our core issues. So there's a really, really cool book called Gifts from a Challenging Childhood. I read it a while ago. I pretty frequently recommend it to my clients, especially if we're doing any kind of family of origin work or developmental trauma work. It's a super easy book to read. It kind of delves more into the specifics of the model. It has a lot of different exercises you can engage in yourself, and just different ways to kind of help spark curiosity in your own family of origin, and how that might be impactful, or that might be impacting your present. So that would just be a book resource that I would give you guys. So it's called Gifts from a Challenging Childhood. So
I love it. I remember you recommended that book to me, and I read it, and it's phenomenal. Yeah. So just an affirmation to close this episode with, perhaps this concept of, I can explore my family of origin story with gentleness, with patience, with compassion. So this exploration is really just an invitation to you all to start exploring your family of origin story if you haven't already. So thanks so much for being here on the Becoming Anchored podcast. It's always a joy to have you guys on the show. Thank you, Lauren, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, guys.